Hello, everyone. Welcome to TechCabal Live. We're waiting for one of our panelists, but we're really glad to see all of you here today. We're going to have an interesting conversation with Faith Keza and Oswald Guobadia. I hope we're all ready to have a very insightful conversation into what the future of digitization is like for us here in Africa. Welcome, Oswald and Faith. Thank you for joining us today.
Good morning. Thanks for having us.
Good morning. Thanks for having me.
All right. So before we begin, I'll give a brief introduction of our guests to get us familiar with people we're meeting today. Faith Keza is the CEO of Irembo, which is a technology company in Rwanda that develops digital products focused on users in emerging markets. Irembo Gov, which is Irembo's pioneer product, is a government services platform, and to date, they've created access for over 8 million citizens and foreigners to over 120 public services, and through a 4,000 agent strong network across Rwanda. And prior to Irembo, Faith worked in Silicon Valley as a software engineer at Google, at Delphix and Oracle. And she graduated from the Massachusetts Institute of Technology, MIT, with a degree in electrical engineering and computer science, and a minor in business administration from the Sloan School of Management. She's currently serving as a member of the board of directors of the National Bank of Rwanda and Rwanda Development Board. Welcome, Faith. We're very glad to have you here. Then we have Mr. Oswald Guobadia. He's the co-founder of DBH Africa, a building infrastructure and top-tier technology solutions provider in West Africa. He's a business strategy and technology consultant with over 25 years experience in technology and business strategy. His interests also span venture capitalism and entrepreneurship, with significant interest in mentorship and funding startups. His goal is to help build sustainable businesses that contribute to economic development and job creation. He's also the founding director of the Edo Global Foundation, an initiative focused on development and support of the next generation of Edo creatives. Welcome, Mr. Oswald. Thank you. So, to get us acquainted, I have my colleague Alex, who's a senior writer at TechCabal. He'll be moderating the chat room. Of course, in the chat room, you can make contributions, talk about the session going on, introduce yourself, but of course, let's keep it very orderly and, nice. For the questions, if you have any questions as the session goes on, you can, of course, use the Q&A section of the call to have that go on. So once again, welcome to TechCabal Live. Today, we'll be discussing lessons from Rwanda. How can African countries fully digitize their economies? Now, by way of just to get us started, the reason we're here today is because Faith Keza is the CEO of Irembo, a company that has been able to digitize processes for the Rwandan government. And so we're here to see in what ways can we, and I understand that there's several nationalities in the audience. And so what ways can we do the things that Irembo has done in Rwanda, and what are the things that are possibly holding us back from getting there? Welcome again. So I will start with just the simplest question. What has Irembo been up to? What has Irembo done in Rwanda so far? What's been the journey?
Thanks, Edwin. So if I can look recently we just celebrated our 6th anniversary. So internally, we obviously have to review what have we done in those 6 years and what can we communicate upon. And really, 3 key statistics come to mind. One is that we've managed to digitize over 120 services. Those are live on the platform and people have access to them. Another is digital transformation. Can I actually create jobs? So we've created over 4,000 jobs. And lastly, it's the hours that we've saved citizen, which is now a metric that is really important to us. Digital transformation is not just like putting manual processes online and still requiring the same number of trips and work on the citizens' part of the governments, but it's looking at how can we significantly make things more efficient. And one of the ways we count that is hours saved in trips or queues. So that's also a huge milestone that we have crossed the 30 million hours saved over the course of that time. And this is really even a lower estimate, as we obviously do not know how many trips that were there before, but we try to estimate on a low end, and that's the number we have.
Okay, that's amazing. So I understand that Rwanda is a country of about 12 million people, and so, but somehow has been, advancing in the area of technology. How was an innovation-friendly economy created for Irembo? How would you say it's been possible to get to this place?
I think at the foundation, you really have a government that has a clear vision of the future, and particularly the role of technology in its future. Rwanda is a very small country, very tiny actually. If you look at the map, you might miss it. We have not a lot of land, not a lot of minerals, and we're landlocked. So if you really think about having to go from zero to somewhere, it's going to be based on a knowledge economy. And the only driver for a knowledge economy is technology, infrastructure, and digital communication. So this is something that was very clear to the government 27 years ago, and they made the early investments that made it possible for companies like us to work and thrive today.
Okay. So I think I'll just, pass a question to Oswald here. So in our case in Nigeria, and I feel like this is, a bit of a, case study for also other African countries that might be on attending now. We, we're not landlocked. We have, other minerals and other things that are, helping to bring in revenue. And so might suggest that there's not a lot of focus on, building the technology sector. But what would you say is being done in Nigeria to get us somewhere where, we can digitize some of our processes? Sorry, Oswald, I think you're muted.
I keep saying this unmuting button thing is like an age test, forget to unmute yourself and start speaking. In addition, I was asked to come speak on the topic of lessons from Rwanda. And I was totally expecting that I'll be flying into Rwanda, to have this session, side by side with Faith. Instead, I'm on the other side of a screen, digitized, and speaking over this platform. So I'm not very happy this morning. Just want you to know that. All right. Yeah. So in Nigeria, I think Faith did a good job of kind of explaining what's going on in Rwanda and the size and the lack of resources, which gave them a focus. Nigeria, we also have the same focus, but I think we also have maybe the opposite of it as well, in the sense that we have a size and we have all these new resources. But when you look at the idea of digitalization from a three-tier perspective, looking at infrastructure, looking at digitalization, and looking at virtualization, Nigeria and a lot of African countries are still struggling or still dealing with just getting the infrastructure right. So you still have conversations around broadband and still conversations around getting the right systems in place, which is the foundation for digitizing your country, or digitizing the government, or digitizing your environment. There's a lot of, if you look at the document, there's a document from the Honorable Minister, Federal Ministry of Communications, Digital Economy, which speaks to 8 pillars of focus. And these areas of focus actually range from digital skills to infrastructure, to digital services, and a number of other areas that that they want to touch on. And it seems like you almost have to do these things all at the same time to move us forward. So it's the issue of, it's a really big project, right? It's digitalizing Nigeria is a really big project. And I think that, a lot of African countries are having the same issue. And we all know it's critical because it's ultimately the future. The next poverty line is really going to be closely aligned with the digital line, right? Where are you in your digital program? If you haven't moved this forward, that's what the poverty line will be for your country. So it's very important that we take it forward. But there are a number of projects that are happening around broadband, around education, with that COVID, moved that forward, around healthcare, and around even digital citizenry. There are a number of initiatives that are being done to move us forward in the digital program.
Okay. I really like how you mentioned, because the truth is, with a lot of these things, it's not simply oh, here is the manual process and here's the digital version of it. There's more that goes into it. There's the, like you mentioned, broadband, there's the internet, there's educating the people. So I will go back to Faith now and say, how seamless was this? What were the hurdles you had to pass through? Because I know, apart from creating the software, which I would actually like you to get into, because it's one of the things I wanted to explore. What are the options now for a country that wants to start something like this? Do you import software? Do you repurpose software, or do you just go right into it? So what were some hurdles you faced in getting to where you are today?
Thank you. So when you think about back to where Rwanda was in 2015, when this ambitious project started, obviously, there's the internet penetration that was very low. It was sub, I think, 8% at that point. Digital literacy was sub 9% as well. So to say we want to have all our services online and have people access them through that medium was obviously too ambitious and hard. So one of the first things that happened is a story I hear, I wasn't there, is that they launched the first 5 services and then had to wait for a while before the first transaction, because people are like, well, I don't trust it. I don't know how to use it. I don't want to spend my money on that. So then we had to kind of build a trust and a brand around the digital platform and how it can save people time and that sort of thing. So the first thing that then was done in those early months and years was to build actually an agent network across the country of people that could help citizens first learn what the platform can offer and then demystify how to use it. And this network really helped us bridge the digital divide, because if you think about your grandmother up north, she's not going to be able to use a computer or even a phone to apply for any service she wants. So you need the government to be much closer to people. You need people in the local centers who know how to use these platforms and help. So those are some of the challenges. So the lack of knowledge or infrastructure for people to do this themselves. And the other one was really more in the back end, trying to get, I guess, the government to 100% adopt using these channels. So one of the kind of mechanism we used was, once the service was live and it was functioning well for 6 months, then they would have to stop using the manual process. The manual process whereby somebody comes to the office, fills out a form, pays at the bank, and brings a receipt. So that also helped for us to move digital faster, but obviously sometimes it was much slower than 6 months. It would take years, and you'd have to be running these parallel services, and that would cause a little bit of confusion. But I think once you adopt it 100%, then you can move faster in digitizing more things and getting citizens to trust the digital journey better than the manual. I'll go see somebody, he'll give me my service, and I'll live happy. And then lastly is on, really transformation beyond just like manually putting the form online and having people be able to pay. How do we make it so much better than it was while it was manual? How do we save the government time? How do we save citizens time truly, so that we're not really like putting out forms that ask them things that we already know, or things that they've given us in a different form? So this is now the re-engineering journey that we're on. And what you realize is that it requires cross-institution collaboration. That means institutions have to share data. They have to align their roadmaps. They have to get their leaders and their teams to want to work together. And working together obviously brings a lot of friction and that sort of thing. So those are really some of the challenges along the way. Infrastructure and access and knowledge, that's one bundle. The next bundle is getting people to work together. And then lastly is really re-engineering things.
Okay, thank you. I do want to touch on the part about, because this is something I think will be a common issue across the board for African countries, the getting people to familiarize themselves with the new processes, essentially. So while you may build the software and have it available, getting people on board. And you mentioned your agent network. Would you say that has been extremely, effective? Do you see some gaps there in the method of, an agent network across the country?
Agent networks are super, super effective. Just to give you a stat, back in 2017, over 80% of transactions on Irembo went through agents, right? And that showed the power of what they were able to do. And that means for, every 10 government services people are applying for, agents are part of 8 of them. Today, that number is now below 50%. And actually, that's one of the strategies that we've been pushing for, to make government services so easy. People can do it themselves or get a friend or family member to do it. So that's also part of re-engineering things so that they're much easier. They require less attachments, that require less cafe, kind of African cafe services and things like that. So no, agents are still super important. And even today, people ask a lot, do you see agents being phased out completely? And I don't see that happening for a few more years, just because of where the digital literacy is across the country. Some people still need to be helped. Some people use a computer once a month, or a smartphone, once in a week or less. So to get them to really think digital when they think for any service for a bank, a government, or anything is not in the near future. But this is how governments, I think, can go digital, by creating these hybrid processes, the 100% digital and then the assistance network around it.
Okay. So you mentioned that at the time when you started the project in 2015, you said the internet penetration was about 8%, you said?
Yeah, I believe less than that. I don't.
Okay. So I know it's gotten up to, like, today, we're looking at about 31%. It's gone, up a bit according to some data. But then I think now I want to switch to, also, in Nigeria now, according to data, we are looking at close to 50% internet penetration. And, would you say that we are poised, we're at the right place to begin, digitizing a lot of our processes? Because as it stands, in preparing for this, I went to read some stories about what the Irembo, what Irembo has done with making these processes easier. And you have people who would normally walk a lot of miles, aka the hours saved, like Faith said. And so they are, they are aware of how this helps their life, and so they are willing to learn. Would you say that at 50%, internet penetration, it's time for us to be aggressive with our movement, or do you think we still need a bit more time?
So I would say 50% is a great number, but we also have to look at 50% and what how that is spread out, right? So if you look at that, I'm sure the concentration of that 50% is very much in the city and the urban areas. So we have to start having conversations around rural connectivity. So that, once again, going back to the digitalization line and the poverty line, so we're not really leaving the rural areas out of the process. I would say that, what you find is that there's certain one-ups when you speak to digitalization. So if you look in Nigeria, things like BVN, TIN, a number of other things like that, I've gotten digitized, right? And it will continue, but the foundation of a program like this will also be digital citizenry, right? So who's a Nigerian, what's the digital identity of a Nigerian, is a critical place to start. And that's where the NIN program comes into place. So how you feel about it aside, from a structural perspective, when you look at the starting point for a project like this, is really getting access, which would be rural, is also identity. Who are you, and who are you in the system, and who are you in the country, right? So getting the number, like in America, it's a social security number. In England, I think it's a national health ID, and a number of other places do have these numbers. And I think once you get those two things right, then we'll be on a fast track to getting it done. But the processes themselves, actually getting certain processes done, you have to look at that. That's actually, some of it is enshrined in how the civil service operates, how the agencies are set up. So there's actually a policy drive to be able to make some of these changes from how the services are provided to the citizens. So it's a multi-pronged project where you're dealing both from the source and services and from the user base to ensure everybody's getting digitized at the same time.
Okay, to touch on that, with how much work is on the government really to help make sure everybody is included and not just people in the urban areas. How would you say it has been with, because this is for Faith. I know this is a public-private partnership. This is a government, and Irembo is a private company. What would you say has made it easier for you to work? Because it's not necessarily like Irembo is it owned by the government, by the way? I feel like to clarify.
The government has significant stake in the company as well.
Okay, so I think that's where I'm going to. Do you believe this structure you have has been instrumental in the success you've had so far, or do you think there's it could be different for different countries, or do you think this will work across board?
I do think for any digital transformation to stick and hold, you need agile teams that can react to the exact evidence that's on the ground. But when you think about the way traditional government teams work or traditional government planning works, you start with a budget year cycle, then you have to do procurement, then you have to do this and that. So it's a very complicated place to build great software for people. So that's why I think this model is interesting. I don't think it would apply everywhere. And the UK has a different model. They have these teams internally in the government. But in Rwanda, this has really helped us to be a side of the government and have more of a private sector mindset in terms of how we roll out things, how we make sure that they work. And our business model is very well aligned with the government's in that we don't make money unless people transact and find the services to be useful. But if you thought of a traditional government team that was embedded in the government, their incentives are really to check off a list of things that they have committed to doing that year, maybe. And once it's out there, then it's like, oh, well, these are the problems that we found on the market. And then we'll need the next budget cycle to kind of change some of those things. But having that scrappy mindset and entrepreneurial, I guess, spirit in the company as a startup helps us better react and better design for actual commercial use, which makes it more sustainable, I believe, in the long term.
Okay, I really like that answer, and of course, to the audience, if you have any questions, please use the Q&A section of Zoom. Just leave those questions there, and we'll get to them. So, to Oswald now. I don't know the current structures in the processes being carried out now to digitize. Would you say we are employing this model? I know we've privatized some, some structures and tried to privatize some things in the country, but would you say that that is what we're doing now in terms of these digitization processes? Are we working with private companies, or are we just doing government so far?
So I would say that a number of different models have been put in play over the years, right? I would think the one that's been most persistent has been more so government sets an agenda with the budget and it goes to bid, and people bid for the work. But the model that Faith just described is something that I've always thought was interesting and something we probably definitely should look at, because one of the things you have to think about is the political window, the political cycle, right? We have a project that is basically a 15-year dexterity project. You set the course, in 2000 and 2015, you're handing the keys over. You've been at it for many years. When you look at the change in government, in line with that, it can create, start-stop situations where, the current model that we're on may not work for a project that needs 15 years of continued, sustained, progress on it. So that's part of the problem, right? And that's sort of where we differ from Rwanda in some sense, in the way our government is structured. So I think something that puts this program, looking at it as it being very serious, it being literally the future, on a train that runs by the side of government, not necessarily in government, and is guarded by policy and enshrined in law, to deliver on the digitalization of Nigeria would be an excellent approach.
Okay, I think that's something that definitely should be looked into across board, because I think in other countries, in the way that governments are usually structured, it's usually best to have involvement, of course, of the government, but enough so that a company can say, you know what, we're earning, like Faith said, you're earning money because you're doing this work. Your existence is dependent on the work you're doing. So for Faith, how much sway did policies hold in making sure Irembo has gotten as far as it has, because were there things that compelled citizens to participate? Were there things that, maybe not compelled, but helped, them to accept this easier? Because I know it probably would have taken a bit of, work on the government's part to get people to say, what, yes, we'll take this as something that will make our lives better. So what would you say, what role do policies play in that?
Policy plays obviously a key role. As I mentioned, as far back as 10, 15 years ago, we had different ICT strategy national plans, right? These were called NICI 1, 2, 3. And these are 5-year plans that try to say, well, where do we want to be in 5 years? And this is on the government side and policy work. The first one was about creating an enabling environment, so that is institutions, policies and things like that. The second phase was around infrastructure and all of that. And the third phase, which is where our contract came out of, was around actually creating services on top of the infrastructure. And then the next few ones in the next few years are going to be about transformation and digital transformation in various sectors. Hence the recent introduction in Rwanda of like CDOs, which are digital transformation officers who are very senior, and they kind of work across sectors to see, okay, what are the synergies, what should we be doing? So that's really, I guess, from the policy overview of what the government has put in place. And when we designed our contract, we did have some of those things around, phasing out manual processes and things like that to make the business more sustainable. But I think your question was more to how did citizens get incentivized to use this? And I think that story in Rwanda is not a story about policy or policing or all of that. I think citizens here have a deep trust in the government. And that actually makes a lot of social programs or transformation programs work, mostly because people trust that if the government says something should be done a certain way, that it's possibly the best way to do it. So you can even see this in the recent kind of organization around curbing COVID spread and things like that. When we have a mask mandate, people wear masks. People are quite surprised when people come here and see even like the randomest person on the street has a mask. And there's nobody like policing that extensively, but people do what the government asks them to do generally. And so Irembo falls under that kind of construct as well. It doesn't hurt that we try to make the services good and we try to create access and we try to market, but I think it's just people trust the government is doing the right thing with their data or with their policies and things like that. So that also helps in our ability to move fast.
Okay, so I think my next question might be a bit off field, because in your experience, did people trust the government? But do you have any ideas on what can be done in a situation where probably people don't do it as much?
I mean, I think that this is why it's great that we have Oswald on the call, because Nigeria is a different and I think comparing countries sometimes is really comparing apples to oranges. What we can do is just share our kind of context, and then people can kind of piece out what makes sense and what doesn't. I don't believe that Nigeria can approach things the way Rwanda has, mostly because in Rwanda, decisions they move fast because they're centralized and we have a big government push across many different spheres of life. But in Nigeria, you cannot have that sort of centralized power, if I may say, or control of kind of policy and enacting it, because you kind of have very many different interests, different tribes, different diversity. And I think that that's your strength, and it's better to maximize that strength, obviously through creating smaller Rwandas across Nigeria, and then those kind of compete with each other or thrive by trading with each other. And that's how I would say that. I don't think that the goal is to create national trust in Nigeria. I think it's more to create stronger regions and then a stronger federal country as a result. But these are my 2 cents.
Yeah. Oswald, what would you say to that? To how we can, as a country, and I hope this can be applied to other African countries as well, and how they can approach based on their unique situations. But Oswald, let's hear from you.
I would say that Faith, your check is in the mail.
No, I'm doing free consulting. It's okay.
We're sending you a check immediately for that. I would say that, our strengths are our weaknesses are our strengths. Ultimately, we need to figure out how it will work for Nigeria. We need to take notes. I mean, ultimately, all these African countries, even the fact that we call it countries is part of the problem. All these African states really need to sit down together and understand how to solve, some of these problems on a continental sort of a plan, a shared vision, understanding that, look, like I've said before, and I keep repeating it, some of these things are issues, and it's going to lead to us being left out of the ultimate digitalization plan for the world. So if you look at what's happening in a number of different countries, they're moving very quickly on the digitalization plan because they understand that people who are left out on the other side of the digital line will be the new poverty line. So it's critical for Africa to get on this train because, it's the future. And interestingly enough, when you look at our demographics, we need to even forget the whole idea of tribes. It's really a case of the now and the future, right? We look at our demographics when we have 60% of our citizens across the continent, in fact, 1.3 billion people, 60% are under the age of 25. That is the actual future right there. And that's the digital future. And that's why we need to have a cross-border plan that actually addresses how we digitalize our processes and how we digitalize our people.
All right, thank you. I think it's a very, as we're all here, we're talking about actionable ways that we can, move forward with digitizing our individual countries. So I'm going to go a bit into the tech of things with Faith for a bit and find out, because I know before, Irembo started building its own software, you were using, external software that was gotten from outside of the country or from, third-party developers. So I wanted to find out, because, Irembo has done both these things. They've used third-party software and also created theirs. What would you say have been the advantages of creating your own software? And do you think it's advisable for a country to start with third-party or just go ahead to create their own software?
So I think that there are pros and cons to both approaches, which is why it's better to have a clear strategy of where you want to land and what you want to do. I think that there are some things that are core infrastructure that it's kind of, you do it once and maybe you reap the benefits from that project for 5 to 10 years for 15 years. So for those projects, you don't want to kind of reinvent the wheel. If it's identity systems that have been done before, you just have to figure out which one you prefer to use. If it's, I don't know what other systems I can call core, or hospital management systems to run your hospitals across the country in a certain fashion for the next 5 to 10 years with some adaptations over time, like health records management, things like that. However, I think that there's a layer of solutions that have to always be changing and adapting to the needs of today. By today, I don't mean 5 years from now, I mean the next 3 months. People are really not happy with X, we need to change that. And I think for those solutions that are touching a lot of people every day, you need to really have local teams that can adapt and change those things so that you can be more agile. There's no way to be innovative if you have to be on a midnight call to India to change the color of a button. So I think you have to pick and choose, and this is where we need digital leadership in government, of people who know what they're talking about and can assess these different things and make good decisions. Some of the problems that you find is that the people making the decisions don't really understand the first principles of technology. So then everything is the same to them, and it's like procuring a table. But you need to decide, is that table going to change a lot or is it not going to change a lot? And so those are some of the pros and cons of both models. But in the case of what Irembo does, we create a G2C platform where citizens and or businesses can interact with the platform daily. So we need to be able to change that very fast. If, for example, people say there are too many steps for this, that they always fall out at a certain point in time, and then they have to go to an agent. We need to investigate and do some user research and figure out what we can change there so that it can be 100% digital for them and they don't have to leave their homes to go and get the help of an agent. So it depends on the kind of solution that you're building. So if it's something that's been done somewhere before and all you want to do is have the same exact thing and you're sure it will work in your context, then go ahead and buy it and implement it. But if it's something that you're not sure, if you're buying solutions from, I don't know, Estonia or India, and these countries are super different from your country, and you want to kind of put that in a rural Rwandan city and have that thrive, maybe it will fail. And that's where you need to say, okay, let's be more agile, let's do a proof of concept, let's build something small and see here what the principles underlying this solution are. And if you find it's basic, then you can outsource it. If you find that it's going to need to change a lot, then you need to build teams around that.
Okay. Oswald, throwing that to you, what would you say are, what would you say is the current approach of Nigeria with software acquisition and or building? I know very recently we have the continuous voters registration going on with INEC, which is great that we're able to do that part online. However, there are some issues. So now I don't even know if it was built locally or it's an third-party software, but I think there's some issues with capturing images at the end of the registration processes. So what would you say is more prevalent here, and would you say there needs to be a change soon? So you're muted also.
Sorry about that. Once again, the age test, right? So I would say there's been a very strong drive towards digitalization, right? A lot of the software that we've seen put into use by government in the last couple of years, and especially as a result of COVID, have all been locally driven, right? A number of them, even when it comes to tools that were used during the COVID to distribute sustenance to people, were all locally made. So there's been a very strong drive by the current Ministry of Communication and Digital Economies. One of the things they've actually been pushing, even down to leadership of companies who are in the country, we're trying to get that local content in the management of those companies. Is one of the things that I've actually witnessed and seen happen. Also, in that same vein, understanding that one of the key ways to increase local software development is to create an enabling environment. So one of the things we're working on right now is the Nigerian Startup Bill, the NSB. The Startup Bill is meant to create an enabling environment which would allow for more companies to be able to create these locally developed software and solutions for a lot of the things we deal with. We have a lot of these solutions, and I'm not going to name any of them particularly, that are made in Silicon Valley that do solve problems here locally. But we certainly could develop the exact same platforms with our own local context as a main driver of it, and to solve the same problem. So those are some of the things we start looking at. But the NSB is meant to create an enabling environment through law, enshrine some things in law, some regulation, certainty, to help these companies thrive and be able to survive to the stage they start creating a number of solutions for the country and the continent.
Okay, thank you so much. I do think it's very important that we look at how we can enable the startups, because another thing we have going for us, I would say, in Nigeria is the startup scene. The fact that if even the gaps found in infrastructure and everything they're currently being people are trying to fill them with their startup ideas and whatnot. And it's when I heard about the Nigeria Startup Bill, I was very excited about it because it was due. But also I know that organizations like the International Trade Center in the UN, with the UN working on startup bills across different countries, including Senegal and the rest. And so it's good to see that we're at this place where we are currently trying to help startups, build more. And I think I want to find out from Faith, what's that like in Rwanda? Like the approach to young startups and you trying to create solutions. What's the relationship like with the government over there?
It's by no means even relative to what Lagos has. Lagos has a very thriving startup scene. I think you have a lot of talent over there and a lot of great businesses. I would say Rwanda, we're at the very beginning of this journey. And I think what is making it nascent is really the size of the economy. I do think tech is a layer above traditional sectors. If you think of traditional sectors as banking or construction or other things, then tech goes on top of that to enable it. So as you're trying to build these other sectors to be strong, then you're trying to also push tech. It can be a bit of a challenge. So that's kind of the problem I see in Rwanda sometimes, that our businesses don't have the opportunity to have access to a big market of businesses that can consume their software or use their software. And so one of the things that we need to pivot to thinking about is how can we build in Rwanda, but for Africa? And the way you're seeing the Africa Continental Free Trade Area coming up, if we could create the most conducive country in Africa to do business in, then I would hope to attract a lot of Nigerian talent and Cameroonian talent and African talent to Rwanda, so that we can build solutions here for Africa, and that can be a better, more viable model. And this is the same model as Israel, and these are the small nations that don't have local kind of capacity to consume their own solutions. So you have to build for others. While in Nigeria, you have the luxury for building for your 200 million people, and you have the market size, and you have the ability to create pace tax and flutter wave and that sort of thing. So I think that that's where the government is also pivoting as well, trying to create Rwanda as a proof of concept hub. Hopefully first for international companies like Zipline and Babil Health, which you might know in the health and drone sector, to come and prove their concepts here, maybe in ways that the regulations in Europe or America cannot let them do, and then see if they can scale it in Africa. And then eventually maybe to African companies as well, and local talent and local teams. So I think it's an exciting journey if we can just keep making Rwanda super conducive for business, super conducive for people to move into and out of the country. For example, no African, I believe, needs a visa to land in Rwanda or arrive here. So hopefully that makes people explore, travel here, see what they want to do here. And that will help our tech scene, I believe.
Thank you. So Oswald, you see, we need to watch our backs, because Faith and Rwanda are ready to take our talents. So we need to be watchful. But yeah, no, I think it's very interesting, the idea of building for Africa. I think, every country in Africa should have this, Pan-African view of how we're creating ourselves to become, a place that other Africans can come to build. We can build things across borders. So I think, just a reminder to the audience, please, if you have any questions or comments, on the session going on, you can leave some comments in the chat, and of course, leave your questions in the Q&A box. So I know we already touched on some of it, but what would you say, Faith, are some, what's it called now, some gaps that haven't been filled so far? It's been an incredible journey. You're providing over 120 services digitally to a lot of Rwandans. So what would you say are some gaps you still notice? Because I feel like it's best for, with other African countries, present and people listening, to have a holistic view of, okay, this has been done, but here's some other things, so that people come in and can see, okay, these are the things we might encounter even after hitting some milestones. So what would you highlight as some gaps that are still there to be filled?
Yeah, so maybe how I would frame that is lessons learned on the past few years of this journey. And I think those would be that the most transformative, I guess, projects or services are those that require a lot of cross-institution collaboration. And we kind of avoided that in the beginning, mostly because of the way we were thinking about digitization, which is you go and you get a service and then you learn from the institution that offers it, how they're offering it, and you digitize it. And that was really I guess, a missed opportunity to really re-engineer and think, okay, first of all, is this service even relevant in this day and age or today? Second, if it's relevant, why is it there? And you start to really ask these design principle questions, and that help you arrive at a better place, and then you can better advise the institution in charge. And that's a lot of the work that we're doing now, when you start to realize that, for example, for kids in Rwanda, you can only get a national ID when you're 16 years old. However, you're consuming and using government services before then. You're going to school and you're sitting for national exams. Those are administered by the government. And it's very hard for us to track who's who when it comes to students. When you're getting health insurance as part of your family plan, you also need to be added to your parents' health insurance. But as a child, you don't have an ID. So it starts to become very hard to track those type of people who don't have IDs or offer them services, or Rwandans who are living abroad. We also have a very thriving diaspora community, and they don't have access to national IDs as easily to apply and get them. So when you start to kind of see these gaps, you realize you need cross-institution collaboration, because for the education sector to offer great services, kids need national IDs, and kids' national IDs are managed by a different institution like the National ID Agency. And you kind of need to bring all the stakeholders on the table and say, hey, these are the problems we foresee, and this is how we can solve them. But of course, these are lessons that we're learning as we are doing these things. And there's really no way to kind of short circuit that. I think the best thing is to just start wherever you start, with whatever mistakes you bake into your solutions, and then hopefully change course as you learn and know more. If you think about it, Rwanda is really just at the beginning of its digital government transformation. We're just, less than 10 years into it. But if you look at the countries we all know and admire, I saw somebody mention Estonia. Those are countries that are on a journey of over 20 plus years. So there's a lot that we've learned in the past 6 years that we can hopefully apply to the next 5 years and 10 years to see a lot more smoother experiences for citizens that don't require them to like deal with one institution at a time, when what they really want is the end goal of all those institutions. So someone once made a joke that we make citizens APIs. So go to Irembo and then apply for this document, and then download it and then attach it on this other service. So they're really collecting data from different institutions and, inputting them into another institution, and then that one does its thing, and then you get the output. So how can we make citizens do less work by getting government to work better together? And that's kind of the biggest lesson I think we've taken out of the last few years.
All right, thank you so much, Faith. Oswald, I think just to piggyback off that, I think, so I know you already mentioned that, efforts are being made towards helping to, the NIN, for example, having a digital identity of some sort for every, person in the country. But based on the conversation we're having now, what would you say are some actionable things, some things we can look at in the Nigerian economy now and say, okay, you know what, we can start here, to get to our goal? I know we're working on, I know there was a recent Digital Africa conference where we talked about the countries, what is being done to help 5G enter into the space. I know in Kenya, a lot of work has been done there. So what would you say are some actionable things that can start soon, possibly, if we make moves towards it? Sorry, Oswald, you're muted.
Once again, I would say some of these things have started, right? They're all in progress, right? As I previously mentioned, all these things all happen at the same time. To get digitalization right, you do indeed have to work on access. Everybody needs to be able to access it, and you need to ultimately digitize your citizens, right? Just like Faith has said, the actual product are the citizens, right? This is why Google gave everybody free email, because the data points on each citizen is what's the critical asset, right? So what's the asset of Nigeria? 200 million people. What's the asset of Africa? 1.3 billion people. And how we digitize them across the continent is a critical thing we must work on. So it's already started. So NIN as a program is the idea of giving everybody a number that will help them access services. Next step, start digitizing those services, right? Your health services, your immigration services, your access to transport, your access to education, your access to getting your transcripts. all these things and access to them being digitalized, and your NIN being the tool or the key or the API plugin, as you said, to get into all these services, right? So the starting point is really working on the access and also continue to drive the initiative of giving a number to every single Nigerian, right? So you actually have a number on the system. So that's kind of the criticality of the NIN program, and is one of the reasons why it needs to be driven and everybody needs to go sign up for it as ultimate drive to getting digitized. Otherwise, you're not in the process. You're outside of the digital line, which I've said before is the new poverty line. And if you don't get into the system, you're going to be sitting outside of it.
Right. Okay, so I think we're now going to the Q&A section of this thing. Thank you so much, Faith and Oswald. We've had a very insightful conversation, I think, and we're about to take it further with questions from the audience that will help us dig deeper into how we can actually achieve this across board. So this question is from an anonymous attendee. It goes, how do you manage the risk of having a single customer in the government? And I think this is probably mostly directed at Faith, who is currently having, her main customer being the government. So what would you say is the approach to that?
The approach to that is really, we're trying to, first of all, offer the best possible services we can offer so that there is value on their end to keep us. But on the other side is that the problem that the Rwandan government has is the same problem that other African governments have, and they keep reaching out to us and asking for solutions. And so one of the things we're trying to do is create a platform ultimately that can help any government or any state or any government agency go digital as fast as possible. If you think about how easy it is internally in our organizations to create Google Forms and send them to our teams or our partners, it should be that easy to create a government service. And so how can we create an engine that helps governments plug in their data and then they can offer agile digital services to their citizens? So that's a big, audacious idea that we're working on. And then on the flip side, we also get a lot of inquiries from businesses that also want to go digital. In Rwanda, the government has led the way, but maybe any private businesses, especially during COVID, realize, okay, they also need to have digital transformation journeys. And a lot of them want some solutions from us. So we're working on a few tangents and payment and other places to help more businesses go digital as well, in parallel to our current work with the government of Rwanda.
Okay. One of the questions is directed at Oswald. It says, hi Oswald, it's by Prince M. Is Irembo probably similar to Remitter platform in Nigeria? Is it possible that Remitter can be expanded to digitize other parts of Nigeria's service sector? Lastly, if Remitter can't expand as suggested, can you advise how a private company can partner with the government at different levels to offer digital services, which is actually long overdue, they say? So yes, how would you say a company can, and also if Remitter is already doing that?
That's an interesting question, because it sounds like it's the company, as mentioned, is already doing exactly what the question is asking for, right?
Yeah, I think that they want to know if there's space for a private company to step in and.
They're a private entity. I actually know the owner of Remitter. They're a private entity, and they've done quite well in the payment space. And if they have products that they feel would add value in other areas of the government or the digitalization journey, in the current model, they're more than free to partner. I mean, there's a lot of opportunity the same way they've done it. So that's why I sort of said that the answer is sort of in the question. Remitter is already doing that, and other companies are as well. So it's a case of, I think, as we previously stated, it's a case of are we executing on the right model? Is that the model? I don't think both entities are the same as Faith has described it. What she's described is quite different, and we just have to see if that model is the model for us.
Okay, thank you. So a question here says, ask if are any of you familiar with the Estonian e-government model, and what are your thoughts on a similar model being implemented in African economies? So I know Faith mentioned that that's something that's been looked at, Estonia being a good example of I wouldn't say I'm familiar with their government model, but I'd like to hear thoughts on, exactly how expansive it is and how it can be adapted here from both.
So I think I think Estonia, if I'm picking on the right country, has a very strong digital citizen platform where it's is down to you're buying milk on the shelf, right? It's tied to the digital identity, and all services have been digitized, from birth to death, right, cradle to grave. I think that's what I read up on Estonia, and that's certainly the way to go, right? And that's kind of where most countries ideally should be going, as we've stated. The citizens are actually the assets, and providing services to them is what government of the future should be looking to do. And as Faith mentioned earlier, making the provision of services easier for the citizens is another KPI of government, is a critical KPI of government. So in that process, if you read the Estonian story, you will see that it started sort of the same way. And I think reading it had influenced my thinking as well, because digital citizen is actually a very critical project. How do you digitize your citizens to be able to provide them services? So if you think, for instance, during COVID, one of the critical problems wasn't so much should we provide aid to our citizens. The question was really, who are the citizens, right? The question was, where are the citizens? The question was, where are the citizens that need aid? Where do they reside? And then it became a question of, okay, once we've identified a few of them, how do we get this aid to them, right? When you're shutting down everything. So it's really the way of the future. And you almost have to think about it, what if we're in space? How do you provide these services, right? So and COVID, interestingly, provided a very good glimpse into how we have to start thinking of services in general, as in we need to move from, touch and feel and paper to being able to do things more electronically to be able to provide services to our citizens.
Faith, what are your thoughts on adapting the Estonia model to Africa?
The Estonian model is very, very interesting. I think if you look back at the history of Estonia, when it got its independence, I believe, from Russia, it was a very small population, less than 1 million people, I believe. And they have a huge landmass and people are spread all over the place. And so to administer all these government bureaucracies that most states have, they would have to hire so many people that there'd be none left. So one of their strategies was to make sure that they 100% automate everything so that there's no back office. There's no person in the government administering things, but citizens can have access to all of these. And it's a very different background than most of us where we are, and the need to create many jobs and all of that. So what perhaps we have learned from it in Rwanda, and which our government is starting to put into practice, is the idea that the government is one, and once you give it data, the government should not ask the data from you again at all. So if you think about it, if I go to a government place and I get married today, they give me my marriage certificate, and I'm officially married to X. And then tomorrow I need to do a land transfer, and then they say, no, we need your marriage certificate. But you are the government and you're the one that married me. You should have it and you should know it. So in Estonia, they have that idea that it's an ask once policy. And I think that if we all kind of thought about that policy and implemented it into our processes, and as we're building these digital solutions in Africa, that we'll end up in a much better place, because indirectly what it does, it forces government agencies to work together, which means if you've collected certain information, I might need it. So we need to put a process or a system that helps us share this information across the board. And that's really, I think, at the core of their solution, which is the strong identity system, as Oswald said, and then this X-Road project that helps them all share this information across the government. And they have also now started to obviously share this information even beyond government to banks and the sort. And now you even have e-citizens that are not Estonian. So as a Nigerian, as a Rwandan, you can become an e-Estonian by going on their platform and having access to this rich digital infrastructure. And in fact, I have a friend who lives in Rwanda, and he is e-Estonian. He has a bank account in Estonia. He has a business registered in Estonia, and he does some work online, and sometimes they pay him in an Estonian bank account, and he can spend from there. And when you think about governments that can do that, you suddenly realize that I might physically be in Rwanda, but I am consuming and living and paying taxes in a different state, just because of how far they've managed to digitize their government and create this really conducive environment. And I think that that's the opportunity that most governments in Africa should be thinking about, how to do very well for your citizens, and then at some point create a huge enterprise that can also serve others that are not your citizens. And that's really like the Google model or Facebook model. It's everyone in the world, but start with, I guess, your own people.
Okay, I really like that because I think it really pushes the citizen of the world agenda, where you can just be in one place and have access to. You need to run a business somewhere else, you can do that. And one thing you mentioned about the Estonian model that I think I really like, and I think we're getting to, and I hope we get there quicker, is the ask once model of things, where I'm talking to the government one time and let that be like just the one time. I know with an attempt that has worked and I think should be replicated in Nigeria has been the bank verification number, where you did this one registration where these are my accounts and they're tied to this one number. And so now if I need to sign up on fintech platforms, I can provide my BVN. Although recently I think there was a bit of a block on they're having access to that, but it's a good idea to have a one-stop shop for these things. Okay, to move on to another question. Okay, so someone asked in the start, and this is for Faith, in the start, what were things you planned or built and thought were not going to work well with the citizens, but finally worked well surprisingly? I don't know if you have any of those, but if you do, were there things that you were not sure of but took off?
I think most things that we've tried to do are things that are clear needs and people complain about them. And then we're sort of kind of responding to that. But obviously, there's instances where you advise an agency and then the agency doesn't want to listen to you for many various reasons. One is that they don't understand the process you're suggesting. Another is that they have a back-end vendor who has designed a system a certain way and they don't want to pay that person to come and change it, or they don't want to touch it. And for one reason or another, you end up launching a service that you know for a fact is not an ideal service. And lo and behold, it breaks in production for many different reasons, or citizens find it very difficult and complain a lot. And because we're the front end of the government, we really take that heat. And then, unfortunately, that is the heat that then we then go show them and say, look at these thousands of tweets, these emails of people complaining about the service. And then usually they're very happy to change it because, I said it's a very responsible government. But sometimes in the beginning, you do have that bit of tension where the institution will not listen until you have evidence that it's not working.
Okay, thank you. I think I like that you mentioned like what it is it's very database. It's very, people need this and we're creating. There is a question here about the person says they live in Rwanda, they're based in Rwanda, and they use Irembo services, and they're talking about how we can be more user friendly, they say. But also the question they also have is, are there any plans to expand to other African markets? Basically Irembo for Tanzania, Irembo for Nigeria, Irembo for all these places.
Yeah, I alluded to this a bit earlier because we do get a lot of governments traveling to Rwanda to see how this works, and they get really excited. But when you think about the long procurement process that it takes, to even get to a place where you can start to solve their problems, it's a lot. So one of the ideas we're thinking about is building a SaaS product, a service as platform as a service, basically where they can, when they visit us, they can build a service with us, and then they go home with one service that they can then choose to do what they want with or add more. But this is still a very complicated kind of thing that we're exploring because different states are very different. Rwanda is very different, even in the mode of the kind of the way the government is structured is very different from, say, Nigeria or another country. So to export, you have to really think deeply about what is it that you need to export, and then what is it that should be built in that country's context and in that country's local, for that country's specific context. So that's kind of what we're thinking. We have huge ambitions to try and do this across Africa, but obviously we need to pace ourselves and really figure out the best way to do that.
Of course. Okay, so I will start this question. I'll throw it at Oswald first. And so Reese from Rogue and Associates says, what can communication agencies do to drive the shift of industry from country A towards being like country B. So in a country that has policies solely dependent on government decisions, there's usually a hurdle in driving such change. So what do you think is the role of comms agencies and people who are basically specially tasked with passing across this message? What do you think, and how do you think they can work in both these countries and industries?
Comms agencies? That's not too clear. When you say comms agency, what's the question?
So like basically digital agencies that's I'm assuming
so digital marketing agencies and
essentially, yes. So, and basically because I feel like there's a lot of evangelism to be done in these things. So yeah. Do you see a gap there?
No, I mean I think to answer that question specifically, I think everybody has a role to play. I think too often we get stuck in our own boxes and we break down into smaller groups and thinking that it's more so solving the problem for that smaller group, right? We break down to tribes and sub-tribes and sub-tribes. I think when we are talking digital, there's more the now versus the future. So comms agencies should really be selling the picture, should be drawing the picture of what the future should look like and bringing out the data points. I think the first time I read somewhere that we're 1.3 billion and 60% of us are under the age of 25. And also looking at the rest of the world, there's a graphic out there somewhere that shows the aging economies for the rest of the world and thinking into the future. So you have other countries who actually have aging economies and you have ours that seems to just keep refreshing with youthful people. You can see that ultimately that our products that are made here can actually be sold to the world over time, right? It's just about really getting it right now. So comms agencies, who are the people who tell the stories, who are primarily made of the youth as well and young people, should be telling this story, should be putting out these data points out there that enables us to learn. Government people learn as well. We see this information, we take it, we process it, and it helps, it aids this proper decision making. So I think it's critical that that the storytelling puts out these data points, the stories that come out become more positive and shows us where we could be going as opposed to the detriment and the issues of where we are right now.
Okay. Before we move to Faith, I just want to quickly answer someone who said they missed the discussion. This recording, everybody who's attending this recording will be shared with you. Once it's ready after this, so there's no worries. You can watch this again on TechCabal's YouTube. And a shameless plug when it comes to telling the stories of Africa and South Africa. I feel like TechCabal is doing a great job. So please make sure you are reading and subscribe to our newsletter. So Faith, what do you say? And I feel like because you are currently in a situation where you're digitizing services in Rwanda, what would you say has been the role of communication agencies or just communication in general? But do you see agencies plugging into that, professional communication agencies?
So yeah, we do a lot of media and especially radio in the beginning to really get people to know what's going on, where they can get services, what's on the what's not on the But I think where we are now, we're saturated. I think people think that there are more things on Irembo than there actually is. So the message has gotten out there. But now what we're trying to do is build better stories so that people can see also how this applies beyond just getting the service, but how we can transform over the next few years. And I think once citizens, at least the ones that can advocate for certain things, are aware exactly of where we could go if we just aligned on some high-level principles. And I believe we could move faster. And that's the role of our comms as well. And that's what we're trying to do right now, is to create better stories that share exactly what we're doing and then the opportunities that still remain.
Okay, thank you. So we're going to be launching a poll soon to get a sense of how this has been for us, whether how, and some just to learn more about our audience. So please, when you see the poll, please respond to the questions, and we'll continue from there. So there's a question here that I will direct at Faith. Riclio Asiama says, I would like to know how the digitalization agenda has worked in the education sector over there in Rwanda. How has that touched the education sector?
So we don't directly support that sector right now, minus a few services like registration for national exams and paying for those. However, this is one of those sectors that really needs its own platform end to end, where you really manage this as a platform for children and teachers in schools. And I believe the sector is currently trying to build something like that. And then that would obviously plug into Irembo somehow to publish this data to our platform so then citizens and their parents can download these things and get access to them. But it's still an ongoing initiative to create this kind of data platform. But I believe what the government has done is try to introduce general tech into education, like computers or computer science classes and other things. But I still believe we have a huge opportunity ahead of us when it comes to technology and digitization in the education sector.
Okay. So there's a question here that I think can go for both of you, but I'll start with Oswald. Someone asked, what advice would you give to the younger generation looking to pursue their careers in IT fields? And I know we're talking about digitizing processes, but I do know that a lot of what will become of this plan is the talents you will have, the people who would see the problems we currently have as opportunities. So what would your advice be to people who are young and trying to create solutions for their countries?
I would say they should be excited. They've been born into an amazing time. It just so happens that my background is technology. Well, that may have been obvious, but I started off doing networking. So I remember back then we used to carry these big books around just trying to learn IP and a number of different protocols for computer networking. Nowadays, there's everything online. You can take a class on YouTube. You can read up on stuff online on your phone. There's even simulators for you to learn how to configure different devices and learn different programming languages. You don't have to deal with things like C++. You have, better graphic-driven programming languages now. It's an amazing time, and I think it just comes down to getting the right attitude and basically gearing yourself in and learning, right? Finding what you want to do, what areas of technology excite you. I'm not much of a programmer, but I love networking. That's my area. Infrastructure, cabling, data center, and things like that. That's what excites me. That's what I got into. So I would think in this day and age, you have access, right? Well, if you have access, right? You have access, and it's really about putting in the work and just learning and getting the skills. Right now, especially since the 2020 COVID transformational period, it's escalated skills being sold globally, right? And that's something I wanted to mention. I was going to pick on Faith earlier when she mentioned about Rwanda selling to Africa. I just think the African states need to sell to the world. And that's ultimately the goal, right? Africa is a massive market, 1.3 billion, but the world is about 8 billion. And we need to be selling, or 7 point something billion. We need to be selling to the entire world, right? African-made solutions. Right now, African skills are being sold. Nigerian skills, they're working from Nigeria in a number of different places around the world. And that's a lot of them are self-taught, developers. So I think it's a case of developing these skills, getting all the education you can, and finding your way to plug into the system.
Okay, I really like that because on one hand, Africa currently has the fastest growing young population. So in a few years, we'll have the largest youth population in the world. And so it's important that we look at that. And also in Africa, selling to the world, a very clear example I have is when Stripe, the company who purchased Paystack, released payment pages, for a lot of Nigerians who saw that, because there was a lot of press around it, and a lot of Nigerians who saw that knew that they'd seen this before and Paystack had done it. And so it's like something that we already had gotten used to. And so there's a lot that we're doing here that, while peculiar to us, could be very useful to countries outside. So Faith, I'd like to get your thoughts on, the younger generation in harnessing what we have as our strength, the growing young population. What can they do to be a part of this journey?
Yes, I do think, as Oswald said, that there's a huge opportunity right now, and I think it's only going to get better with time and with better structures in government and the private sector for youth to plug in better companies. I guess my only comment really is for African youth to not think of themselves as much of African youth, but really as global citizens, and to really find a place for themselves in the world that they can plug in and learn as much as they can and thrive as much as they can. Because I think if you have these digital skills that we all want today, you can be successful anywhere, in Rwanda, in Nigeria, maybe in Kenya, all over the world. So I think go where you can be celebrated and where you can thrive. And then when you can, you should also contribute to the African story in one way or another. And that's how I would say it. So no need to be stuck where you are if it's making you upset. Just build your skills and go somewhere where you can thrive. I think would be my comment.
Okay. So yeah, well, I think we're drawing towards the end of the Q&A. I know Obinna Okwani had raised his hand to ask a question, so I wanted to find out if he still would like to. But there's another question here about, and I think this person is asking to get, like, just in the clearest of terms for both countries, how is the best way to partner with the government as a startup? So I will start with, Oswald, because, I know it's very likely that, but I feel like this is peculiar to different countries. Everybody has their ways, but how would you say, as a practitioner, as someone who started a company, works in IT, how would you say a startup would approach partnering with the government?
So I would say it depends on what you mean by partner, right? So, and what stage of your business you're in. So if you're very early on in the development, I believe, the development of the startup bill would ultimately aid your growth. If you're further established, as a company, then I think you should be partnering with the government on helping develop policies, guiding regulation by way of engagement, right? So basically engaging government to help develop policies and regulation that will aid other people in your ecosystem. But I think all through from ideation to exit or retirement, or whatever your choice of the end game is, or your vision of the end game is, you should be creating solutions that fills in the gap, right? So in places where you feel that you can create a solution that will help government provide better services, or create opportunities generally for the country or the continent, you should be finding ways to engage and provide those solutions. But ultimately, you find that if you create an environment where you're engaging government constantly, those opportunities will become more evident, and the pathway in which you execute those ideas or those opportunities become a bit clearer, because you have a sense of how government works. What I find is a lot of times people don't understand how government works, but they want to partner with government, and that really leads to to kind of the circle feeling you get that nothing's really happening. Because you yourself, you don't know who you're trying to partner with, but you're trying to partner.
Okay. Faith, what would you say? And I feel like you're also in a position where you are, a company that has the government involved, but then you're partnering with the government in some way. So how would you say a company who, where the government doesn't have any stake, how would you say they would go about, partnering, creating solutions for the government?
I think it's very difficult to partner with any government, really, because of the processes that they have to manage. It's not just because you have a great product or something that they will immediately partner with you. It's sometimes because you have a track record, you've done this in another country or something else, and you realize that creates a very small pool of companies that can partner effectively with the government, I guess, from those companies' direct ask or something, unless you're maybe a Microsoft or something. But on the flip side, what governments are doing and can continue to do is creating kind of special procurement processes for not super high risk projects, but some projects, so that local companies can get experience over time. And we're starting to see that happen a lot in Rwanda, where they do some competitions where the best person with the best app wins, and then they kind of help them with a better contract that funds them across the development cycle to do this. So I think it requires more work on the government side, because there's really nothing a small team of scrappy young people can do that can give them like the leverage to then supply to a whole government without the government's involvement themselves in deciding that that's what they want ultimately. But perhaps if you are in an ecosystem where you have bigger private companies, it's better to target those fast and create a track record and some funding. And then eventually you can then offer government solutions. I think that would be how I think about it.
I think you raised a very important point there, with how partnerships can be what gives your young startup life, And I know our last TechCabal Live was with a couple of professionals who talked about how partnerships are how we can move forward. And if possible, we can get a link in the chat box. So I'm going to close out the Q&A session with a question about how we think the implementation of the Continental Free Trade Area will help accelerate this digitalization across African economies. Do you see that being key to us creating solutions that go across Africa, or do you not see it as being that? Because I know it's very focused on supply chain and the movement of physical goods, but what do you think it could mean for Africa in terms of digitization? Let's start with Oswald. Sorry, Oswald, you're muted.
This has just become something else. I think it definitely opens up, a critical area, which is just the mindset on how we think of Africa, right? We think of Africa as one big market. So ultimately, one big market. So ultimately, how we address it and how we approach it from a solution broadens just from the fact that we believe the market is opened up. The digitalization of our different countries or states needs to be seen from a continental approach, in the sense that ultimately, once you start doing things like this policy, this program, you will find that that the markets, like Rwanda is saying they want to sell to Africa, and part of the driver is this AfCFTA. In Nigeria, we're looking at a startup bill, and one of the key reasons, one of the drivers, to name a couple of them, is also this AfCFTA, in the sense that Africa is about to open up, and we need to position ourselves as a place where you can come and be a hub for innovation and solutions development. So I think it's changing the mindset. I think if you speak to anybody else in either one of our roles in Senegal or Zambia, they will probably give you the exact same answer. Africa is about to open up, and we need to position ourselves to ultimately be able to provide solutions to Africa. But as we previously mentioned, I think that's just a first step. I think once we solve the problems of exchange between Africa, we'll start looking, beyond the continental borders and start looking at how to serve solutions to the world.
Okay, Faith, any comments on what the free trade area could mean for digitization across African economies?
Yeah, I think it could mean a lot. It's just fundamentally you have the policies, but you also have the mindset shift that has to happen, right?
Yeah.
And I think that's what's going to take a little bit longer, because if you think about African country X, when it thinks of a great brand name for Y, they'll think German, or they'll think Chinese, or they'll think Indian, right? If Rwanda wants to import the best possible X, then maybe they want to take it from this other country. But I think making this agreement work, making this free trade area work, is also thinking of our neighbors or neighboring countries as really part of our own country, if you think about it that way. So the way I said the Rwandan government is going to work to create better relations with startups in Kigali, we should probably think like that for all startups in Africa, right? And eventually Nigeria should also think like that. And you need to find your core where you will protect your local businesses, and then you need to find the other non-core where you will let others thrive. And I believe we will need really strategic leadership across Africa, from the government level, business level, to really have this mindset shift to make this work. Not just as I will go dump certain products in Rwanda, but I will partner with Rwanda for this type of solution building, and they'll partner with me on this other solution that I'll give them and I will improve over time. And it's going to take time because of, our history and our culture, but I believe it's going to be an exciting time once it clicks for everybody that as a Rwandan, I'm an African, I can work in Nigeria, I can thrive in Kenya, and vice versa. And once we have that, once we have the acceptance of people first, and then we're going to, go to people's products, and those products might not even be prime time ready, but they could be usable. And over time, we'll grow like that. But the world is a highly economically driven place. So the cheapest person has to win. So that will always be China if we don't watch out. So it's just a matter of trying to adjust some of our mindsets around this and try to see how best we can partner African country to African country, South-side cooperation, as they say.
Okay, thank you so much. I think we've come to the end, and I really want to appreciate both of you for helping give a lot of insight into what can be done to help digitize this continent that we live in. And I'm sure like the audience has gotten a lot to work with. So I just wanted to open up the floor to find out any closing remarks, any something to leave the audience with. Faith, just
well, thank you so much for having me here today. It has been great to reflect on, what makes governments digitize and how we can take the opportunities that are in front of us. And I really can continue this conversation offline and see better ways to cooperate in Africa.
Of course. Oswald?
Yeah, thanks for having me. It's really good, listening to what's happening in Rwanda. Really interested in hearing more. And I'll be waiting for my ticket from TechCabal to get me to Rwanda as promised, explicitly, or was it implicitly? I don't know, but either way, we'll do this again and we'll be in country. So thanks for having us.
No problem. Thank you. So thank you all for joining us for this session. This has been amazing. I personally have learned a lot. Our next TechCabal Live event will be holding on the 23rd of July, and it will be with Adam Molai, chairman of Joa Fund. And of course, we'll be having a conference on the 30th as well. Please, you will see the links in the chat room. So please sign up for those so you can be the first to know when it's going on. And of course, this event was produced by TechCabal Insights, TC Insights. It's TechCabal's data research and intelligence unit, which provides actionable data on startups on the tech ecosystem across Africa to investors, entrepreneurs, big tech companies, regulators, and other players on and off the continent. We are always trying to give you the data in as simple ways as possible, give you reports that help you understand what is going on in the African tech ecosystem. Of course, you can also catch the latest news on the biggest tech events and everything happening in the tech ecosystem through our newsletter, TechCabal Daily. TechCabal Daily comes to your inbox every day by 7 a.m. And of course, you can sign up on the link shown there, but the link will be dropped in the chat room as well. That said, I would like to thank everyone again for being here. We have a post-event survey. That link also will be dropped in the chat room. You can take that to help us know how we can make these events better for you. What more do you want to learn? What things do you want to explore? With that said, thank you everyone for being here today. I hope we have a great day going forward. Have a nice time. Thank you, Oswald and Faith. Take care.